In Acts chapter 4 and 5, we see the early church coming together to share their possessions and to give to those in need. Now, it really was interesting to see people look at their land and possessions and think, how can God use this? How can this be sold and used for furthering God's kingdom? Now, since they were acquiring and selling property of houses, let's talk about what that looked like in the first century. One of the ways the land was acquired back then was through inheritance. We saw many examples in the Old Testament, and we saw laws about how land should be divided and given to descendants. And in fact, the firstborn received a double portion. But there are also examples of people selling their land and fields, so you could acquire land through a simple purchase. Now, houses were built on the land, but they looked and they functioned completely different than they do today. First, the purpose of a house was mainly for sleeping. But most of the activity actually happened outside, working, playing. All that happened outdoors, so people spent very little time indoors. This is much different than 21st century America, where people, such as myself, rarely go outside. So because of that, houses were usually pretty small, and it was actually common just to have one room. Now, some houses did have multiple rooms, although that was usually for the wealthy. The floors were made of packed dirt or rocks. The walls were made from sun-dried mud, and the roofs from reeds or straw, and it was also usually covered with mud. Now, wood was pretty rare, but it was used on a house. It would be used for roofing, in the beams, or also for doors. Now, the fact that early Christians chose to sell their land and houses shows just how generous they were. But in Acts chapter 5, we meet a couple that did not have that same heart. So there you go, a little bit about houses of the New Testament times, and that's enough today for our Historical Minute.